Good evening, everyone. We'd like to welcome you in joining us in our program that we have today. We're so happy for you to be joining, and we appreciate your flexibility in joining over Zoom, and then also taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's program. We have a great turnout for today and a great audience, and we're excited for today's program to share some information with you in regard to patient participation in medical research for lupus, what's new in lupus research, and how to get involved. Disclosures, so it's necessary for us to talk about disclosures today. So HSS educational activities are carried out in a manner that serves the educational component of our mission. As faculty, we are committed to providing transparency in any relevant external relationships prior to giving an academic presentation. So Dr. Kyriakos A is a consultant for Ensign Pharmaceutical, and he's also attended an advisory board meeting for Urania Pharmaceuticals. Jeffrey Zhang's son, Priscilla Terrell, Melissa Finney, and myself have no relevant disclosures to announce. Next slide, please. Program overview. So today we're going to talk about recent progress in lupus treatments. We'll also be discussing active clinical trials in lupus that we have here at Hospital for Special Surgery that are available to patients. Next, we will hear the experience of a lupus patient who has participated in a clinical trial. After that, we will find out why we need continued lupus research and the importance of lupus research as well. Lastly, we will be discussing patient barriers to clinical trials, and we will end the presentation today with a Q&A session. Next slide, please. Panelists. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists that we have speaking today. First is Dr. Kyriakos A. He is a medical doctor and a doctor of science. He is a physician scientist that focuses on treating lupus, lupus nephritis, and amongst other conditions. Additionally, he is the principal investigator of numerous research studies. Next, we have Jeffrey Zhang's son. He is a study coordinator. More specifically, he is Dr. Kirou's study coordinator. He works closely with patients in research studies and also is involved in numerous research studies. Next, we have Melissa Finney. She is an HSS patient who has participated in research. She will be sharing her perspective and experience with lupus and research today. And I am sure that you will really enjoy the message that she has to share today. Next, we have Priscilla Terrell. She is a licensed clinical social worker from our clinical social work department. She works out in the community and partners with individuals, patients, and groups, really partnering with patients to ensure that they're receiving quality care along with the resources they need and access. And lastly, my name is Allison Peisner. I am the manager of the Lupus and APS Center of Excellence, and I will be your moderator today. Next slide, please. I will now hand it off to Dr. Kirou, who's going to be talking about lupus research.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's very exciting to share with you our information about how lupus research is done. So to begin with, many of you will probably know or aware of patients. Some of you are patients with lupus, some of you may have relatives with lupus. Lupus is a potentially serious disease. It affects females more than males, approximately 10 females to 1 male ratio. Young people are often affected and more severely. It's a difficult disease to study because not everybody has the same symptoms. Lupus has multiple phases, and it could be arthritis, skin rash, kidney disease, and others. Another problem is that in our research for lupus, our clinical trials, we don't have representation by all groups that are affected by the disease. So we have underrepresentation by African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians. So improving that will help us understand how drugs work best for everybody that is affected by lupus. Consequences can be several and severe sometimes. Lupus can affect the emotional life, family, social, and professional lives of patients with lupus. The existing treatments are good, but not optimal. Our goal remains to control active disease so that we can prevent damage. Next slide, please. Just some examples of the multiple phases of lupus. On the left side, you see the butterfly rash or malar rash. This rash is often induced by exposure to the sunlight, the UV rays. The middle picture shows you arthritis. So many patients will have joint pains, and some of them might develop deformities, like in this case. Finally, on the right-hand side, you see a picture of kidney involvement. So this is a biopsy where the green material is antibodies, autoantibodies, that are deposited on the kidney and cause damage. Next slide, please. So we currently have several treatments for lupus. You all know about steroids, prednisone or methylprednisolone. These drugs work very quickly. They're effective, but unfortunately, we cannot use them for a long time at high doses because they can have problems. They can cause osteoporosis, weakening of the bone. They can cause weight gain, high blood sugar in people that already have diabetes, mood changes, sleep problems, cataracts, and also increase the risk for infection. We also have other drugs, including hydroxychloroquine or Plaquenil, which is an immunomodulatory drug. It's a good drug, but not very, very effective. We also have immunosuppressive drugs that suppress the immune system, such as mycophenolate or Cellcept, azathioprine, methotrexate, and cyclophosphamide. These drugs are also good, but sometimes are not tolerated. People can get GI side effects like nausea, and they cannot take the amount needed to get better. They also can have other side effects that limit their use. So we definitely need new drugs that will be more effective and safer than the existing drugs. This will allow us to treat lupus better and allow discontinuation. We have to eventually be able to stop steroids. Next slide, please. So progress in the science of lupus has allowed us to consider other targets. For example, B cells. B cells are lymphocytes that produce autoantibodies. These are antibodies to self-proteins that can cause damage in the body and inflammation. Examples include ANA or anti-nuclear antibody, anti-double-stranded DNA, and anti-Smith antibodies. These are the best known antibodies in lupus. There are others, of course. We also target T cells. T cells are another type of lymphocytes that are helping B cells do what they do. They also activate other cells in the body to become more inflammatory. The way they do this is that these cells, when they get active, the B cells, the T cells, and other cells of the immune system, they produce cytokines. These are inflammatory proteins, such as interferons or interleukins. These cytokines bind to cells, other cells in the body, and activate signaling proteins, and those transmit the signal of inflammation and production of inflammatory molecules. So signaling proteins can be another target for new drugs in lupus. Next slide, please. I like this slide because it gives you an idea of the progress we have made in the last 10 years. As you can see in the top panel of the slide, aspirin, steroids such as prednisone and hydroxychloroquine were approved by the Food and Drug Administration long time ago. But in the recent decade, the last decade since 2011, we have seen some progress. Belimumab was approved in March 2011 and works by targeting the B cells that produce those autoantibodies. Belimumab was approved last year also for lupus nephritis, the kidney involvement in lupus. Voclosporin was another drug that was approved this year. It targets a signaling protein within cells, and this is approved for lupus nephritis. Finally, more recently, anifrolumab was approved for lupus. This is an antibody that targets interferon, one of those inflammatory cytokines. Next slide, please. In order to make progress in treating lupus, we have different types of research. We often do observational studies where we observe patients and we register data. For example, how active is the disease now? Do they have a skin involvement or joint problem? We do that by including them in registries. We also have repositories where we keep samples of blood or urine as needed for our research. So these will give us clues to find out potential new targets, new drugs to use for lupus. And now we're going to hear more today about clinical interventional trials. This is the final way before the final research done before a drug can be approved for lupus and used. They're usually sponsored by the National Institute of Health or pharmaceutical companies. And HSS here, Hospital for Special Surgery, is one of several prestigious academic centers that work in lupus, all together with other centers in the whole North America to develop new research trials and develop new drugs for lupus. Next slide, please. This slide is meant to give you an idea how this progression happens in development of a drug. We start with preclinical disease. This is the studies we do in the lab or animal models of the disease. When we identify potentially good candidate drugs for the disease, then we proceed with human studies. These start with phase 1 and 2 studies. These are usually studies of small amount of patients. And they are there to give us an idea how safe is the drug and what is the right dose to use when we go to phase 3 studies. So phase 3 clinical trials are large. They're usually done with hundreds of patients. And the purpose of that is to definitively prove that they work, that the drug will be effective. After this is successful and the drug is approved by the FDA, then people may also continue to participate in studies that look for long-term safety. Those are extension long-term safety post-marketing studies usually. Next slide, please. I just want to give you now some terminology you will hear in clinical trials. Randomization or randomized trials are trials where treatment is assigned by chance. So somebody will get the drug, somebody will get the sugar pill, which we call placebo, but this is happened randomly. They're double-blinded, meaning that the participant and the study staff, none of them know who gets the drug and who gets the placebo. This is to make sure that the final result will be very, it will definitively show the benefit, and there will be no problems with the study. So that's very, very important to have the double-blinded, so there's no bias by the patient or the study team to think that something is happening, somebody's getting better while they're not. Finally, all the studies, the clinical trials are very closely monitored. We usually monitor patients every month to make sure they're safe, and we apply all the protocol in the most detail that is needed. Next slide, please. Okay, there are potential barriers for patients to participate in lupus research. That could be due to, because they're busy. Patients like us, they're busy with their professional and their family social obligations. Many patients will also be anxious. They have concerns about their safety in the clinical trial. They also may be anxious about getting the placebo, the sugar pill, rather than the active drug. There may be lack of awareness about how lupus research is done. And this is now the purpose of this webinar, to just inform you about this and get you to know better how things are happening in lupus research. And finally, some patients will not have access to a research center. We're going to hear more about patient barriers by Priscilla Toral, our social worker. Next slide, please. Being a participant in a clinical trial can be beneficial to the individual patient because they more likely get a drug that is effective and safe. People also, when they're followed carefully in a study, they're usually better because they come to appointments and they take their medicines, all of them, better. And last but not least, is that if the drug proves to be effective in the end, approved by the FDA, it will become available for people who were not able, for whatever reason, to participate in the clinical trial and get the benefit for everybody. Next slide, please. So since safety is really a concern of everybody, so this is what we do. Up front, when somebody joins a study, we go through the informed consent process. This is where we sit down with the patient, the research coordinator, and often a family member of the patient. And we just go over all the details about the study. What do we know about the new drug? How it might work? Do we know about any side effects already? And we hear questions from the patient, and we try to clarify all of them, all the questions. Then we go through eligibility criteria. Not everybody will be suitable for the study. Somebody that has, for example, rheumatoid arthritis may not be good for a lupus study. Also, somebody who has active cancer will not be a good patient for some of these studies. Of course, this varies from study to study, and some patients that their cancer is already well treated and under control, they might be able to join some studies. Finally, there is oversight of all the clinical trials by an independent institutional review board and other safety committees. This IRB is an administrative body established to protect the right and welfare of patients recruited for research. It's composed of scientists, physicians, but also patients and lay people who give their perspective of research. Next slide, please. So the safety continues to be our major concern when somebody is already in the study. So we follow the protocol very carefully, very rigorously. If there are any problems, we report them very promptly to the IRB and also the sponsor. The sponsor can stop the study if there are many safety concerns. The investigator or study physician can also stop the study drug for a given patient if they develop a certain complication, for example. They can do that also if the patient doesn't get better from lupus. In that case, we will give the patient a different drug that is already approved for lupus. The patient often will be asked to stay in the study because we want to see how they behave, how their disease behave when they take the active drug or any other drug for lupus. The patient finally has the autonomy to remove themselves from the trial at any time for any reason. Next slide, please. We want to continue this information session for you by following an example of a study. This is the Tulip Trial. The Tulip stands for Treatment of Uncontrolled Lupus via the Interferon Pathway. As you heard already, now you understand the terms. It's a multi-center, multiple centers across the world are participating. It's randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled phase 3 study. This is the phase of the study that will lead to approval if proven effective. 360 patients were randomly assigned to receive the infusion of the active drug anifrolumab or placebo every 4 weeks for 1 year. Of course, patients would also receive their usual drug for lupus. This is in addition to the standard treatment that they were already receiving and wasn't enough for them. After the end of the study, eligible patients may also enroll in the long-term extension for 3 years to study the safety for a little more time. The treatment drug here, the name of the drug is anifrolumab. Next slide. This slide is to show you how this happens, how this drug works in a schematic way. So interferons, you can see there with the blue, orange, and green circle, are cytokines, remember these are the inflammatory proteins in the body, that they're usually activated by a viral infection. However, in lupus, they are there for no reason. They're produced in huge amounts without a good reason. And they can then attach to the interferon receptor, IFNAR1 and 2, with a green indication there. Now, we have developed this drug, anifrolumab, the purple Y-shaped picture there, graphic. So anifrolumab is designed to bind to this receptor and block it from interferon. So when it binds, it doesn't allow interferon to bind to the receptor and increase inflammation and cause lupus symptoms. This is how it works. Now, I would like to give the podium to my research coordinator, Jeffrey Zhang-Sun, who will give you some more detail about how we do the studies practically. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Kirou, for the introduction. So my name is Jeffrey. Good evening, everyone. So I'm speaking today a bit more about details that would happen and what a patient can expect in a participation in clinical trials. So I want to start by defining a couple more vocabulary that would be relevant for the discussion. The first of which would be the primary objective. And so these are vocabulary that are used in clinical trials that have certain goals with an experimental drug. The primary objective is the ultimate scientific question that any trial is designed to answer. In the case of lupus studies, this would be something like, can this drug make lupus better? Now, we don't really know what better means. That's a very general term. And so we have something else called the primary endpoint. That's the marker measured at the end of a study to see if a given treatment has worked. And that's compared between the placebo group and the treatment group. So we have a way to see exactly if this thing worked or not. And we don't have just a baseline. So we have a comparison and an effective way to measure it. And an example of that would be an improvement in lupus symptoms after the study is completed. So of course, we also have the eligibility criteria to make sure that the group of people who join the study are good and effective and will do well and are expected to do well from receiving the drug. Next slide, please. So going back to the Tulip study as our example, the study here had an endpoint to evaluate the effect of anifrolumab on reducing the disease activity of lupus. This was a 1-year-long study, and the enrollment, so actually 373 patients were enrolled worldwide. And this is across over 100 different sites. So we had a lot of patients. It was a phase 3 study, and the other thing is it's difficult to recruit, and this is why sponsors has asked many sites to get involved in the hopes of getting 1 or 2 patients per study site. Next slide, please. So as for the parties involved in a clinical trial, at the top of the slide here, we have the Institutional Review Board, the IRB. This is the group that Dr. Kirou mentioned earlier that helps with safety in these clinical trials. This is the group that oversees all biomedical research involving human participants. Their goals are to protect the rights and welfare of research participants throughout all studies, really. And they oversee the other groups involved in a clinical trial. So the sponsor, in the case of the Tulip study, this was AstraZeneca. That is the organization or company that is funding and basically has created this study, designed this study for a particular drug. They work with the contract research organization, which acts as a middleman or middle group company that is often hired by the sponsor. They help with data collection, data organization. And then, of course, we have the study sites. This is where the real nitty-gritty of the study is being done and where the study results are coming from. So HSS is a study site, and here's where the study doctor or the principal investigator, the study coordinator, and patients are. And the study site is where the drug is really going to be tested. So again, the study site is where the actual study happens. And the study team is here at the study site. So this includes the principal investigator or the study doctor, and the roles of the principal investigator would be responsibility for proper conduct of the study. So this study doctor is involved in the informed consent, overseeing patient safety, and performing all the medical assessments needed in a study. The study coordinator is also there to make sure that things are running smoothly, in addition to the PI's work, the principal investigator's work. The study coordinator assists with data collection, organization, and communication amongst all the parties involved in the clinical trial. Next slide, please. So in a study site, you can visualize the structure of the study site as a triangle here in the center in purple, with each point of the triangle representing the patient, principal investigator, and study coordinator involved in any particular trial. So the triangle demonstrates the central team, and outside of this, there's also additional support groups available to patients. In particular, social work provides many great resources, programs that patients can access at any time. And Priscilla is going to be speaking more about this later on in today's webinar. Next slide, please. So if somebody were to be interested in a clinical trial and would like to get involved, the first visit for this study would be something called the screening visit. And the first thing that would be done at the screening visit is something called the informed consent form process. So this is the discussion between any potential participant and the study staff. The goals of this would be to give the participant plenty of time and opportunity to review purpose of the study, goals that the study is trying to accomplish, discuss risks, benefits, alternatives to participation, as well as review other things like the schedule of the study, what can be expected of the participant, and other information like costs, compensation, confidentiality, and anything else that anyone might have to ask about the study. And it's important to note, this is not a binding document in any way. It's more of a recognition that the detail, there are a lot of details on, and that this discussion was had. It's really to protect the rights of the participants, and that to know that we've had this discussion, that the participants have had a chance to really understand what is going on in this study. And we encourage everyone who is looking to get involved in a clinical trial to discuss with or bring along a loved one, especially to the informed consent process, because it can be difficult to really get and understand all this information alone, and to make a big decision as big as getting involved in a clinical trial by yourself without support. Next slide, please. So after the consent form, the rest of the screening visit is going to look more or less like a typical doctor's visit. Eligibility is going to be checked, and that just means we're going to be reviewing medical history, current medications, symptoms, physical assessment, that sort of thing. Additional assessments might be some surveys for participants to fill out, and other tests like an EKG or chest X-ray. Blood and urine laboratory tests are typically performed at each visit, and this is to follow how the lab results are doing at the same time as the symptoms are. And so we have two ways of measuring disease activity. No drug is given, though, at the screening visit, because eligibility has yet to be confirmed and randomization has yet to happen. Next slide, please. So if a participant is determined to be eligible by both the study team and the sponsor, randomization will occur within a couple of weeks of the screening visit. And so this randomization is where the patient will be assigned by chance to receive either the treatment or the placebo for the remainder of the study. This is what Dr. Kirou mentioned earlier for randomization. And again, this is a double-blinded process. So neither the study team nor the participant will know which treatment is assigned until the end of the study. So the drug would be given at the end of this visit. Next slide, please. So for the rest of the study, the research visits are going to be regularly scheduled, usually once per month. And these will consist of the physical exam, assessments, more review of symptoms and medications, some more surveys, and more laboratory testing, and as well as the regularly assigned dose of the study drug. And it'll look like this until the end of the study. Next slide, please. So I want to point out that since these studies are very long, they can be 6 months to a year. A lot of people interested in clinical trials wonder if they can leave at any time, or if it's like binding. And the answer to this is that study participants always remain in control of their involvement. So participants can choose to stop the treatment with the study drug if they do not wish to continue. And this could be for any number of reasons. If they're not feeling well enough as they would have hoped after getting this drug, if anything comes up that they're concerned about in terms of symptoms or unexpected risks, they can stop. Participants can also choose to stay in the study and receive just safety follow-up without receiving the drug, and there's no problems at all with that. The doctor can also choose to withdraw the patient from the study if that seems to be the appropriate course of action. Next slide, please. So study medication can be a variety of forms. Sometimes it could be intravenous, it could be a shot or an injection, or it could be a pill or taken orally. And this will depend on the nature of the drug that any particular clinical trial is studying. In the case of the Tulip study, anifrolumab was the drug, and it was administered intravenously once per month. And at the end of every dose, or right after every dose of study drug, the study team or nurses will monitor participants for safety for any reactions that occur for 1 or 2 hours after each administration. And this is to make sure there's no allergic response or anything else that comes up. Another concern with clinical trials that often comes up is about cost and compensation, and if people are worried about time and about things needing to work. And so costs associated with all study-related procedures, research visits, are all going to be covered by the research study. There's generally not going to be any cost for doctors' visits or labs that are part of the study schedule. So any things like an EKG or chest X-ray, those would not be billed to the patient or the patient's insurance. And there's usually also compensation, like reimbursements for expenses, like travel, childcare, meals. These will vary depending on each study's particular budget. And these are things that should be and will be discussed in any consent process. Next slide, please. So patient safety, we cannot emphasize this enough, but the doctors and study team will closely monitor patients' health because safety is of utmost importance for these clinical trials. Flares, worsening symptoms, abnormal labs, all the sort will all be monitored very closely. And for this reason, in a trial, any participant should always report any side effects that come up, even if they seem to be unrelated to the study. And this is just to be completely transparent about everything that happens. So, and after receiving the final dose of study medication, there's typically 1 or 2 more safety follow-up visits, just to make sure that after stopping the drug or coming off the drug, there's no additional flares or any other concerns that come up. Next slide, please. So if a study ends up meeting its predetermined endpoint or objective, as we mentioned in the beginning of my section, then it's considered a success. The sponsor will submit this data to the FDA and ask them to consider this medication for approval. In the case of the Tulip study, as mentioned earlier, anifrolumab was approved by the FDA in the end of July earlier this year. And so now we have a new drug on the market, for treatment of moderate to severe lupus, in addition to the standard of care therapy that many lupus patients are already on. So it's important to note, though, that we can never have successful clinical trials without enough patients. It's very important that patients of all demographics and backgrounds are adequately represented in clinical trials. So African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, and other minorities all comprise a significant portion of the lupus community, yet make up only a small part of clinical trial participants. And in order to get effective new therapies for lupus, we need to have representation from all groups of people to make sure that these trials that they represent everyone who really needs it. For this reason, we're so grateful to have all of you joining us today on this important webinar. Next slide, please. So I just want to close by sharing that we do have a few clinical trials available at HSS now. I have the link here on this slide, but it will be linked in the chat, and it will also be sent at the end of this webinar in an email. So I also have my contact information here, but we will also be having a Q&A section after this webinar, so please feel free to submit your questions in the chat box below. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Melissa Finney, who very kindly volunteered to share her experiences in participation in lupus research. In particular, she was a participant in the Tulip study here at HSS. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Finney. I have a few notes, but honestly, I'm just going to talk to you about my experience. So wanted to tell you about how I was originally diagnosed and how I signed up for the study. I'll give you a few tips and benefits and all of those sort of things, but I just want to tell you my honest to God experience with everything. So a few years ago, when I was 36, I had recently gotten engaged to be married, and I woke up one night in the middle of the night feeling absolutely terrible. And my fiance was awoken as well because I felt so horrible, and we just thought, we're pregnant. And we were so excited, and we went to the doctor, and the doctor said, you have a virus, go home, you are not pregnant. And a few days later, I could not walk. And I went home to my family's house in Philadelphia, and my sister-in-law is an infectious disease doctor. And I remember passing her something across the dinner table and her looking at my hands, which were swollen to the size of baseball mitts, and her saying, tomorrow I want you tested for lupus. I'm so grateful for that, because I know many of you on the call struggled for years to be properly diagnosed. And I got really lucky that literally there was a doctor in the house, right? And so I remember telling my fiance at the time that I had lupus, and he was so grief-stricken when I told him that. And I had never heard of it, so I could care less. In fact, I just couldn't wait to get to the doctor and get whatever pill they were going to give me to cure this disease I had never heard of. And he told me that both of his best friends' mothers had died of lupus or a lupus complication. So he knew instantly how serious it was, and he began to work with the Lupus Foundation immediately, trying to work on a cure. So, okay, so that said, I went to the doctor, demanded my pill, demanded my elixir, my salve, whatever the hell they were going to give me to make me feel better. And that's when I learned that there was no cure. And almost immediately following, my health deteriorated so rapidly. I remember during that time, we were discussing whether I would be able to work, if I could have my first dance at my wedding, and whether I'd be able to have kids. Sorry, I know many of you have had similar communications with a loved one. Excuse me. Anyway, almost a year following my diagnosis, again, I begged for anything. And I was told that at the time I had mild lupus, and so I was not eligible for the clinical trials. Excuse me. I'll take it, thank you. Anyway, so almost a year later, I was at the office pretending to be okay when I had a stroke at work. Y'all, God is always on time. And not only am I okay, but my stroke took my lupus from mild to moderate, which made me qualify for the study. I immediately entered the study. Now, look, I know that there are people on this call who do not want to be anyone's guinea pig, and I do not blame you. There are so many reasons why you would consider not doing this, and I 100% agree. However, I was desperate and I wanted my life back. And I went from being 36 to 96 really quickly. And I went from being admired in the subway station to perfect strangers helping me up the subway stairs. And so I just wanted my life back. And I will tell you, I'm so grateful. Okay. I want to tell you some unintended consequences of being in the study, besides feeling better. I'm so happy to report that in August, Dr. Kirou told me that Jesus, y'all, excuse me, that I'm in remission. Whatever. Here's the other things that are great about this. you have the best team behind you for all of the other things that are happening in your life. In June 2020, I fell while walking my dogs and I fractured both of my arms. And it was during the height of COVID, so I didn't go to the hospital. I went to urgent care. Everyone on this call should know that people of color are treated differently in medical institutions, and I am no exception. And especially as someone who couldn't take care of herself, who didn't have 2 working arms and couldn't get herself to look, like a member of society, when I went into urgent care, they refused to x-ray both of my arms, and they refused to give me any pain medication, and they deemed me pain seeking. I called Dr. Kirou's team immediately and was instantly able to see the HSS team and the orthopedics, and was put in a lovely cast and a sling. Oh, I looked crazy, but I had the best care, and I'm so grateful for the team for that. You should bring everything to your HSS team. The things that you think have nothing to do with lupus, you should bring it to them, because I promise you, you are going to get better care there than any place else. It was at HSS that I learned that what my gynecologist told me about lupus was incorrect, and that I could have kids. For 2 years. For 2 years after getting married, I thought I couldn't have kids. And I lived with that. And so I brought that to my doctors at HSS, who said that was not the case, and that they could help me through that if that was something that I wanted to do. Now, obviously, I could not get pregnant during the study, but it just opened and broadened my world. Okay. Also, being part of the study forced my job to acknowledge lupus and how serious the disease was. I work in the music industry, and it was a very big deal when Selena Gomez came out with lupus, but my job still did not know what it was. And it was being part of a monthly study really solidified to them that my condition was real. And I know many of you do not want to share your condition with your job, but I would encourage you to do so, because you become instantly part of a protected class. So please consider doing that. Okay. If you do choose to sign up for a clinical study, I know you've heard over and over again that you should bring someone, and I'm telling you, you should bring someone. Not just because, well, who cares why not just because, but because nobody makes it alone, guys. You are going to need support. There are so many times that I became terrified that I never thought I would be afraid. The very first time was the very first time I came into the office and came into rheumatology, and all the chairs are really high, and I was the only person in there, I don't know, under 60. And I got so afraid, like, oh my God, is this my life now? Will I never be able to sit in a normal chair? And I had a full-blown panic attack. And it really, really helps to bring someone who will stay calm and who will stay sane, so that you can have whatever feeling you are going to have, and they can be the calm one. Also, I want to say, it really matters who you bring. We all have people that we love that are not the people that we should turn to in crisis. Leave them at home. You are going to have your blood pressure taken, and they're not going to let you leave until your blood pressure is stable. And so you should bring somebody in that lowers and stabilizes your blood pressure. All of you know exactly what I am talking about. So bring the right person with you. The other thing too is, please empower the person you bring to ask questions on your behalf. There are many times that doctors have said things to me where I have been stunned into silence. I remember right after my stroke doctor telling me how serious my stroke was, and that it was a miracle that I was still alive. I could ask her no more questions. And the person in the room with me, who had a notebook, asked all the vital questions that I should have been asking, but that I did not have the capability to ask at that moment. Bring someone with you. Okay, so finally, I just wanted to say, I know that there are some of you out here who are just simply not going to move forward with a clinical trial because you're doing good enough and you're stable and you're okay. And to that, I want to say, I want you to reevaluate good enough. You deserve better than good enough. And I would love to tell you, I'm so grateful that that the Tulip study was successful and that this drug is now on the market. I will tell you that after I started to feel better, I had horrible survivor's guilt about feeling better, and so many women, especially Black women who look like me, not feeling better. And I'm so glad that they can receive it too. However, my desire to be part of this study was completely selfish. I am not that altruistic. Do this for yourself. Save yourself. You deserve the best. Fine is not good enough. I wish you all the best and wonderful health. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for speaking today and sharing your perspective and giving us all a glimpse into your own personal experience. Your words and your journey is so powerful, and I'm sure everyone will be taking something today from your message. And I can see that from the chat. People are sending you love and hugs, and just a very super powerful story and journey. So now I will introduce Priscilla Terrell. She will be discussing disparities in lupus clinical trials.
Thank you so much, Allison. Thank you, Melissa, for your powerful sharing. And to everyone who's joining us today for this important conversation, I'm going to be talking about disparities in lupus clinical trials. Next slide, please. Lupus disproportionately affects minority groups such as African Americans, Latinos, and Asians, and these populations often experience higher symptom severity, more lupus-related complications, and higher mortality rate, in addition to other disparities such as lack of access to appropriate care, transportation barriers, and lower socioeconomic status. Next slide. As we've been hearing from our presenters today, the goal of clinical trials really is to discover new and better treatments for disease. And currently we have about 100,000 ongoing clinical trials in the United States, and minority participation in clinical trials is low. African Americans represent about 12% of the US population, but only about 5% of those who are participating in clinical trials. And Latinos represent about 16% of the US population, but only 1% of clinical trial participants. Next slide. So for example, in 2011, belimumab became the first drug in over 50 years specifically approved to treat lupus. And although the study was successful in recruiting white patients, only about 14% of African Americans and 20% of Latino patients participated in the trials, despite the prevalence of lupus among these particular groups. Now, the small sample size of these groups really made it challenging for clinicians to understand if prescribing this medication would be beneficial in treating these populations. So a trial specifically with African Americans and other patients of Black race was warranted to study the efficacy of belimumab. 508 patients of African ancestry participated. This particular study was called the Embrace Study, and it helped to really provide more information to clinicians so that they felt more comfortable in prescribing belimumab to their patients. Next slide. Now, these charts are just a visual representation of the imbalance of disease prevalence versus participation in a clinical trial to find a drug to assist with the illness. So the people who seem to be most affected, as you can see from these graphs, are often not represented in these trials. And this is why it's so important to have a multicultural or diverse cohort of patients represented in clinical trials. Next slide. So we're really acknowledging that there are some real barriers to patient participation in clinical trials. A lot of the barriers that we continue to hear consistently, are especially from our minority patients, really is the lack of awareness of clinical trials. Patients often tell us that they haven't heard about a clinical trial before, or that they didn't even know that they may be eligible to participate. So sometimes we think that we may be doing a good job at recruitment, but we may not be asking everyone. And so oftentimes patients are not referred to clinical trials appropriately or may not be referred by their treating clinicians. There may be cost concerns that may deter patients from participation, such as not being able to afford transportation for what seems like an additional appointment in your busy day, childcare concerns, or even costs associated with meals. If you have to be out of your home for several hours, can be a big burden. These factors may further cause patients to shy away from clinical trial participation. So patients have also shared that lack of bilingual staff and materials, especially when we're looking at Latino populations, can also be a barrier to participation. Information that may be hard to understand and is not often provided in your native languages. Some patients may have difficulty with reading, so it's important to pay attention to these health literacy cues. Mistrust or lack of trust in general is a real concern due to a history of human rights violation, especially in minority communities, is often a real barrier. Fear of the negative impact on quality of life for patients is really another barrier. As Melissa said, some patients are going to question, I'm doing fine, I'm stable. Why should I participate or rock the boat? And other patients may feel that because the participation in a study is a bit risky, and there's no guarantee that the treatment will make them feel better or improve their health outcomes. Next slide, please. More recently, throughout the pandemic, we've continued to see the impact of low representation of diverse communities in clinical trials. So this graph represents participation in Pfizer and Moderna clinical trials by race and ethnicity, in which we see low representation by communities of color, despite the toll of the pandemic on our communities. And closer to home, a study conducted by the HSS Department of Social Work Programs looked at the psychosocial impact on COVID-19 on patients living with rheumatic illness conditions. They did a lot of targeted outreach to reach communities of color by translating materials, working with community-based organizations to expand outreach efforts. And the study yielded some success, but overall, we still found lower ethnic and minority participation, which is really consistent with what we're seeing across national trends and data. This really reinforces that there's still a lot of work to do in dismantling fears, myths around clinical trial participation. So here at HSS, our lupus center is really focused on partnering with our patients to engage them in clinical trials. We want to invite patients to really partner with us. And as we've heard from Melissa, being able to feel as if you're a valued resource to the study, along with the clinician and the principal investigator, is really important to clinical trial engagement and participation. So as a patient, Melissa beautifully encouraged us all to ask questions. We really want you to be as informed as you can so that you can participate in what we called shared decision making. We want you really all to have the information that you need to address the questions and concerns that you have, but most importantly, we want you to share with us what you don't understand about the study or the process that will occur. Your safety and your rights are really of our utmost concern. So it's really important for us to acknowledge historical human rights violations and safety issues. Oftentimes we may shy away from talking about what's happened in history, whether it's related to the Tuskegee studies or sterilization studies in Latino females. However, it's really important for you to bring these concerns into the room and acknowledge that these things may have happened. And that's why we want to ensure that we have a conversation together about your thoughts and feelings. This will help us really to create a dialogue in which we can educate and inform you about our commitment and how we practice. We want to discuss any fears or concerns that you may have about feeling like a guinea pig or being experimented on. As Dr. Kirou mentioned, lupus is a challenging illness. And so it's important for patients to feel part of a team where they feel comfortable really exploring the unknown in a way that feels safe and in a way that has integrity and that makes you feel at ease. So let us know if our tools and materials are not clear, if they're not patient friendly. It's really important for us to ensure that you understand all of our consent forms and you have the tools that use simple language and explain complex or technical terms that may be confusing. So we really encourage you to bring in family members. As Melissa said, we can't encourage this enough because we know that they're your support system and they may help you make these important decisions along the way. So again, remember, it's okay to bring a loved one, your partner, your uncle, a parent, whoever really supports you. We want them really to be inclusive of this process as you seek to make the most informed decisions. We also want to know about any other barriers to future participation, whether it be financial, transportation, childcare that may prevent you from participating. In a partnership, it's important to talk about how to make participation possible. So by openly communicating about these potential barriers, your questions and concerns, our study teams will really be better equipped to provide solutions and resources that will better facilitate your participation. Next slide. As we conclude, we need each other. Our lupus patients are really critical to the success of clinical trials. As we've been talking about, we know that minority participation in clinical trials is essential to reduce lupus health disparities at the individual and systems level, and that this is really an important population to continue to look at. However, all patients participating in clinical trials are vital to help us advance lupus treatment and interventions. Now, diverse study populations for clinical trials really can help us to continue to improve the generalization of findings on the efficacy, side effects, and risk of medications to help patients make better informed decisions with their providers and improve overall health outcomes. Next slide, please. Now, here at HSS, we offer 4 national lupus support and education programs that are available to people living with lupus and their loved ones. You do not need to be an HSS patient to participate in these programs. In addition to our lupus programs, we have social workers that are integral members of the healthcare team and are really here to support you in really addressing any potential barriers along your care journey. So for more information about our lupus programs, please visit our web pages, and those are going to be shared in our chat box shortly. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Priscilla, and thank you for everyone who joined us today. We as a team, we want to partner with you and share information. We want you guys to ask questions. We want to break down barriers, and we want to create trust by being transparent about what we do and why we do it. So it's on behalf of our team, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. This concludes our panelist presentation, and I will ask that you complete the short survey we have compiled, as your feedback is very important for our future presentations and events and would be greatly appreciated. So as we transition to the Q&A session, the survey has been linked in our chat bar for you guys to fill out. So we will now begin our question and answer session. And any questions that we do not get to, we will be sending out an email after that will consist of the questions and answers we may have missed. So we can start by answering a question that was received by email, and it's our first question. So the question is, are there any age restrictions in research? And I will direct that at either Jeffrey or Dr. Kirou.
So every study is different, but usually the studies take patients between age 18, sometimes 16, up to 70, let's say. So that's the usual range, but it can vary from study to study. There will be studies specific for children sometimes. They only deal with children. So it varies from study to study, but the usual will be 16 to 70.
Thank you, Dr. Kirou. The next question that we have in the chat is from someone who wants to understand if you are considered mild lupus and if you can participate in a study.
So mild lupus. So every study has the eligibility criteria, exclusion criteria for depending on the purpose of the study. So if we're looking for a new drug that's for somebody who has severe lupus, we want to get the active patients that have those that have the severe manifestations, so we can make sure they respond. So if somebody has mild disease, for example, a mild skin rash, there are studies for skin rashes too in lupus. So it varies from so depending on what we're looking for. Now there are studies also for people who have inactive lupus, and so we're starting a study where we look at people who might have what we call brain fog, meaning that they have trouble concentrating 100%. And that's another study that we don't have to have very active lupus. The stable patients taking the regular medicines. We try to understand how this happens and how we can help them. So there's a drug there that we will study, and it's promising, but again, we have to do the study to see the results. So yeah, every study is different. So we have to see what are the study, what is the goal, and what are the eligibility criteria. And in our website, we will have eligibility criteria for every study that we have. So Jeffrey will put that in on our website, so they will be available.
I just want to quickly add also that if anybody has any particular questions about their own situation, about their unique situation, we can discuss that offline, not on the webinar, but we'd be happy to get on a call or meet up or anything, and we can discuss this on a case-by-case basis. So there is an email linked in the chat now, the Lupus APS Center email, so you could feel free to send an email there with contact information, and we can schedule a call or anything.
Thank you, Dr. Kirou and Jeffrey. There was a question, Melissa, that came in about specific medications you were on. I saw that you answered, but if you wanted to share a little bit more, I'm sure they'd be appreciative.
Sure, I'm currently on Plaquenil and azathioprine, but I was on Tulip. Obviously, it's double blind, but I will tell you that during the trial, my lupus symptoms completely went away. So, but I am currently on Plaquenil and azathioprine.
Thank you, Melissa. There seems to be someone that has concerns of their significant other in terms of getting them calm enough to come in. So Priscilla, I think this would be a good one for you to possibly talk about some social work programs and activities that we have to offer that would help in that area.
Sure. Thank you, Allison, and thank you for that question. We've been talking about, and Melissa so nicely said, it can be really scary to consider this process. And so, really the purpose of our webinar today, I think a good first step is really trying to open the lines of communication to understand what some of those specific fears may be. I encourage you to reach out if your significant other, or partner, or loved one is connected to a social worker. If not, please bring this conversation to your physician, to your rheumatologist, ask for a social worker to join these conversations to really help you work through those concerns, because the anxiety around these process and just managing a lifelong chronic condition like lupus is difficult. As I mentioned, our support programs are also here to help you along these conversations. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Participants can contact our lupus line and they'll be connected with myself and other resources. You can reach out to us at 212-606-1952, and I'll be sure to put that information out in the chat box as well, and encourage you to look at our web pages and learn more about our different programs.
Thank you, Priscilla. The next question is, do you need to be close to HSS to participate in trials?
I can address this question. So within a reasonable distance, that it would be certainly something that could be done. The only limit would be as far as the participant is willing to travel. So different studies have different compensations. They can have reimbursement for travel expenses, but this can vary greatly between studies. And so it would just be if you were like way out of state, and it would be tough for you to find our site here in New York City. It may be more difficult unless you were willing to make the commute. There's probably also going to be clinical trials in other sites that may be closer to where you live. And now we could try to look into those for other programs available. But yeah, so as for coming to here, there is compensation available, and we won't exclude you or anything if you're not in the immediate vicinity.
Thank you, Jeffrey. The next question is just, are there clinical trials taking place in Toronto, Canada?
I'm sure they are, because they're part of this network of lupus centers of excellence doing research, the Lucin centers of research. And I guess one has to, so sometimes what you need to do is for the individual study, you can look at the website of the sponsor sometimes, or go to clinicaltrials.gov and look for studies, and there will be the centers that participate in different studies there. So you can find out who participates.
Thank you, Dr. Kirou. Next question is, do you have to stop taking your current medication?
No. Some patients, for example, they enter a study of severe lupus, and they are already on some strong drugs, like, for example, rituximab or belimumab. So studies would not like to get those people in the study because it's hard to tell. So whether they will get better or not, because they're already on other drugs that are very strong, and there may be a contraindication to use two very strong drugs, for example. So in that case, they may be, if that's an option and the drug is not effective, they can go off belimumab, for example, if that's okay with their treating physician. And then when they're off for 3 months, that's the usual time, then they can join a study. So it will be, for example, unsafe to do two biologic drugs like belimumab and anifrolumab. We don't know. It might be okay, but based on what we know so far, we like to avoid using those two together.
Thank you, Dr. Kirou. The following question is this drug for brain fog called NeuroPS or phosphatidylserine?
No, this is not that. It's the study is coming out of the central site is the Feinstein Institute in Long Island, and it's an ACE inhibitor. It's lisinopril, and the placebo is another blood pressure medication. So yeah, no, it's a new study, and we are one of the sites in the city here to do the study.
Thank you. Next question is, how is inactive lupus determined? Is it absence of symptoms or DNA antibodies?
So inactive lupus, I guess it varies. The definitions vary from study to study, but in general, it would be taking not a lot of prednisone. You can still have DNA antibodies. You can still have ANA antibodies. These sometimes stay and we don't mind them because they don't cause trouble sometimes. So it's not necessary not to have the DNA antibodies. So somebody could have DNA antibodies and still be quiet or less inactive lupus. So usually these patients do not take heavy drugs, and they don't have active symptoms like arthritis, really swollen joints, very active skin rashes. So, but the activity varies from study to study. So it's defined for every study.
Thank you. And then the last question would be, are these studies for people who have SLE and other overlapping autoimmune diseases?
I think, again, it varies from study to study, but these particular studies that we're doing here at HSS now, they're only for SLE. They are not for Sjogren's syndrome or rheumatoid arthritis, for example. Sometimes some studies, they will allow overlap. So they may say, okay, you have SLE and you have rheumatoid arthritis. Some studies will allow that, but the current studies are specific for SLE.
Thank you, Dr. Kirou. Looks like the last question will be, will the recording of the presentation be emailed to webinar participants? So it will not be emailed, but the recording will be posted on our YouTube channel. So this concludes our question and answer session. We will be sending out the links we have referenced along with the survey if you did not get a chance to get to it. Additionally, if you have other questions, you can send an email to lupusapscenter@hss.edu. And thank you again for your time. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to that email. Oh, I see a participant that may have gotten a return email from it. It's Lupus APS. So there would be a P in there. And anyone who had specific questions in regards to research studies and getting enrolled, you can send those questions over to that email as well, and I will forward them to Jeffrey, who would be willing to talk to you one-on-one.